Okay, part 3 of why head gaskets fail when you put tuners on your diesel truck. So let's come over here to this graph right here. This represents a circle 360 degrees. So this is one crankshaft revolution when the engine turns through 1/2 of its cycle. So, it would start the compression stroke, and then 0 top dead center would be the approximate combustion event. And then as the piston moves past after top dead center, so we really have it half and half. So this is piston coming up on compression and then down on the power cycle is the idea here. Compression, and then the piston would be moving down on the power extraction cycle, okay? So those of you that are familiar with gas engines, you guys are familiar with ignition timing. A gas engine's anywhere from 20 to 30, 35. I've seen some old engines with very inefficient combustion chambers need 50, 55 degrees of ignition timing, even on 91 octane, to get all of the power that get maximum power extraction, just because the way the combustion chamber is, it takes a long time for the actual flame front to get everywhere. In a diesel, especially older tractors, you would see something like, you would set your timing 10 degrees before top dead center. A 4020 John Deere, a 4440, that's a very common 10 degrees before top dead center. And you would measure that with a pressure adapter on the injection line that would measure basically a strain gauge or a piezo crystal that would measure the pressure spike of when the actual fuel, that high pressure fuel, went through the line, and you would set it about 10 degrees before top dead center. You would have a timing mark, etc. So we're going to start with this 10 degree. I've got a graph over here, and this is approximate. So when you have the correct size injector, the injection pump starts squirting fuel. In an old mechanical system, it starts squirting fuel in about 10 degrees before top dead center, let's say at a given load situation, and we graph this out. You would start squirting fuel in back here. Because the pressure is low and the combustion chamber is pretty inefficient, or the bowl on some of those older diesels, the shape of this really matters in a diesel engine. Because of that, there was a longer delay. Ideally, you want this CA50. So what does CA50 mean? And we may break this into a bunch of little parts. CA50 is crank angle where 50% of the heat is released. We want that CA50 to be after top dead center. Ideally, typically, CA50 is at least 5 degrees, but even closer to 10 degrees. Here's the rule of thumb. Depending on how much pressure and advance and everything you're running, because how soon you squirt it in changes how fast it reacts and all of that. 10 to 25 degrees after you start injecting fuel is when you get about half of the fuel burn or half of the heat released out of the fuel. That heat that's released out of the fuel has to go into somewhere, right? So it goes into the other nitrogen that's in the combustion chamber, because our air is only 28% oxygen. So that nitrogen, this is why nitrous oxide works so effectively, because the nitrogen is absorbing that heat, and nitrogen has a massive expansion ratio when you heat it to this level. It's good at absorbing heat and also expanding and creating pressure when we're talking about this. So in a very calm, natural sense, our CA50, or the crank angle where 50% of the heat is released from the fuel and starts turning into pressure, that's after top dead center. We're going to say over here on this graph, let's say it's 10 degrees before, and then we stop squirting fuel. Usually somewhere about this, the fuel will stop squirting. Let's say this is 20 degrees. So fuel is continually squirting in on top of this, and your peak cylinder pressure, that's what PCP stands for in this setting. PCP, peak cylinder pressure, is the maximum measurable observed. So the pressure spike, the maximum amount of pressure that cylinder ever receives. So in a very stock form, it takes quite a while for the pressure rise to spike up, and these are not to scale, these are just representations, okay? I'm just trying to get the idea and the concept apart. So typically we're releasing heat and releasing pressure over an expanded period of time. This 15 degrees after top dead center is a very healthy, safe number, where we really want a lot of the work to be done around that 10 to 20 degree mark on the piston as it's moving down. Your crank angle is better, rod angle is better, all of that kind of stuff. So I'll stop it there. This is what's the pressure trace of a stock-ish vehicle. You're injecting, I've seen like a 6-liter Power Stroke. I've seen injection events after top dead center. On a stock truck, you'll see a lot of stock trucks for emissions. They'll be anywhere from 5 degrees advanced to 5 degrees after top dead center for the beginning of, especially the main injection event, so this main pressure spike. When that happens, your peak cylinder pressure is low for any given horsepower amount, your peak cylinder pressure is low. Your brake specific fuel consumption, it's a fuel flow versus how much horsepower you're getting at. So how many pounds of fuel for how many horsepower you're getting. And that number will creep up, which means it has higher fuel consumption for the same given horsepower as you retard the timing. So we'll stop there. That's part 3. This is a very stock, tame pressure graph of a injection event on a stock truck.